Ready. Ready to go. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Board of Supervisors special meeting on the budget on this June 20th, 2011 beautiful day outside. We'll begin with some introductions about the proceedings, and we are here to conduct hearings on the adoption of the fiscal year 2011-12 budgets and receive public testimony. Our time schedule of events is our public testimony will start at 6 p.m. this evening. Hearings will be continued from this evening on a daily basis as long as we make sure and conclude by 14 calendar days from now. Officially, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearings of the fiscal year 2011-12 recommended budgets for the County General Fund, Fire Protection District, Watershed Protection District, Waterworks Districts, Ventura County Redevelopment Agency, and other non-general fund activities under the control of the Board of Supervisors. That hearing is now open for public comment and comments from department agencies. I'm going to now go to some opening remarks for our CEO's presentation, and then come back and we'll have some opening remarks from my fellow board members. So with that, I'm going to pass it to our CEO, Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Chair Parks and board members and our county leadership team. We are going to work hard to try to come within that 14-day deadline. So just wanted to touch on a few very few, apparently, remarks. And she was teasing me about not knowing how to use this. So. All right, there we go. Okay. So just to review real quickly with your board and everyone, the essential budget guiding principles to live within our means, making sure that our expenses are covered by our revenues, and we feel like we've done that. Openness with the community. This has been a very open process, both today will be and also the process leading up to today's hearings, because as you know, there have been many departments who presented to your board in open session here about the service impacts and how they're going to manage their budget going forward. Delivering county services efficiently and effectively. So efficiently, we didn't include a Y there, but that is our mission here, and our managers have just done an outstanding job of doing that, which has really enabled us to be in the situation that we're in today with a structurally balanced budget and maintaining our long-term fiscal planning. Our approach is to have fiscal discipline and to look long-term and to be ready to make adjustments when necessary, and that's why the department heads and the team have laid out for your board what happens if the state makes certain cuts. We know what we'll have to do here, and your board and the managers have done that and have a history of doing that, and that's kept us solid financially. We also need to make sure that we're aware and cognizant that we're going to have to make investments in capital projects, including things like our IT projects that are on the horizon that are going to improve services and improve efficiencies as well. Strategic workforce management, which is the phrase that we've developed to really describe basically the managers really working hard to manage within their budgets, and that means sometimes holding positions open, not rehiring or hiring at lower levels. And just to give you a sense, we wanted to have a little bit of historical perspective because we've heard the phrase doing more with less, and certainly the leadership team here has done that. But just to look real quick back, you can see back in 2001-2, that's on the far left there, the general fund budget positions were about 5,200, and now going out forward, despite increases in demand for services, that number is down to around 4,712. So over that 10-year period, that really shows that I think the managers are managing very, very well. It's just one way of looking at it. Other things that have been done to get us into a position today to have a balanced budget is a reduction in internal service funds, and again appreciate GSA and ISD's good work in those areas. All the employees contributing to their retirements to the tune of, it's going to save the county $14 million a year, very significant. And just to put it in perspective, we're managing the impact of this very difficult, prolonged economic downturn where you have increases in demand for services and, of course, unfortunately, a decrease in revenues just at the time when you need them most. But the managers have seen that coming, and they've been very proactive in preparing for those reductions and have been able to avoid the substantial service level reductions that we're seeing in other counties. We cite Santa Barbara to our north sometimes, but Monterey, exact same thing, over 183 layoffs, unfortunately. And that's, it's terrible for the job losses, but it's also dramatic, major reductions in services. And so, knock wood, right now, we're able to avoid that here. Some of the departments that we've worked with all of them, of course, but really trying to sustain services also in the sheriff, DA, probation, HSA, and AAA in those safety areas. But it's been great because they're managing their budgets and they're making reductions to the extent they possibly can. But then the county is also supporting their efforts to make sure that we sustain the services in those departments. And finally, at the same time, we're managing to maintain our fund balance, our reserve. And that's very important because those other counties that are struggling, and just like all of our counties are having to dip into their fund balances, into their reserves to maintain current annual operating services. And that's not where we want to be, and we're not doing that this year. We're not really adding much to it, but we're also not dipping into it, so we are sustaining that funding level. And with that, I will turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Paul Dursey.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, Board. Go over some key budget data, and this information has changed since our preliminary budget that we presented to you a couple weeks ago. Total appropriations, $1.68 billion. It's about equal to last year's, or the current fiscal year that we are currently in. General fund appropriations, $872 million. It's down 1.1%. About I think it's about $10 million or down from last year to this year as far as general fund appropriations. General fund, general purpose revenue, $314.8 million. That's down 0.3% from this year's adopted budget. I think that's a new number because we reduced significantly the amount of property tax revenue that we're expecting. We really got it down to about the level that the assessor expects to get for next year, and thus therefore the appropriations also came down by that. It's $3 million is what it ended up being. $3 million reduction in those amounts.
I'm sorry, Paul.
Sure,
just a quick comment to that, and we very much appreciate the assessor raising those issues in terms of what he was seeing as the projections going out to next year, and the fact that the roll was coming in a little bit lower. And so in response to that, we've also adjusted our interest expense down about $1 million, and also from another account in our buy downs and termination account. So that will help us cover that $3 million so that we're very conservatively balanced in our budget right now. So.
Yes, and I think these numbers, the secured numbers, are actually about $45,000 less than what we're expecting for this year, for this year's as far as secured property taxes. So we are, again, trying to maintain a very conservative budget going forward relative to a budget secured property tax standpoint.
I think Supervisor Bennett has a question.
So what are we talking about specifically then in terms of numbers and changes?
$3 million decrease in appropriations and $3 million reduction in the property tax, secured property tax revenue that we're expecting. And we're right in line with what the assessor expects as far as, basically he said I think 0.02% decrease in secured. And we're right, that we're very, very comfortable with that, with being a little above or a little below. Right now we're almost exact. But are those etched in concrete? Absolutely not. We're very comfortable with those numbers where they are currently, if that makes sense.
All right.
Total general fund FTEs 4,712, down 8 positions from last year's adopted budget. These are the what we're calling post-preliminary adjustments, and you should have a copy of what we call, I think, Exhibit A, and that's all the detail of the post-preliminary adjustments. And this is at the summary level, about almost $2.7 million in decrease in appropriations on the general funds side, and also a corresponding decrease in revenue, which we have because we have to maintain a balanced budget, which we have, and the increase in designation for homeless programs. So that is for the 3-year pilot program didn't quite get started in the current fiscal year, so we expect those dollars to basically fall back to our fund balance. They would fall back into subsequent year financing fund balance, so we're basically moving them from subsequent year financing fund balance back into the homeless designation fund balance.
So they'll be available when they are ready.
That is correct. So right now we have $200,000 budgeted for that program for next year, plus $400,000 set aside in this homeless designation for the subsequent 2 years at $200,000 per year. So we're maintaining that program going forward, and as soon as they get up and running, that's the expected dollar amount that they would. It's a little slower. Of course, I think a lot of times these things are a lot slower than what everybody would like, but mental health's been working hard to try to get that program up and running. Decrease in full-time equivalent positions. This 3 is just the post-preliminary adjustment numbers. Overall, I think it was 8. So with these post-preliminary adjustments, we have an additional 3 reduction of 3 positions. In the non-general fund, we have an increase in appropriations about $25 million. Majority of that is budgeted capital projects. About $9 million, $9.5 million, I believe, in the roads fund. A little over $7 million in harbor for their harbor project, the BISC, and then I think another $7 or $9 million. I think I have the numbers written here. If I put my glasses on, I could probably read them. But about $7 or $8 million in the watershed protection district. As far as what they do is they don't get the programs quite as far along as they would like to, and they're sitting on some fund balance, and they would spend their fund balance down. The majority of the revenue is from medical center, from the there's a new acronym that they have, Mike.
DSRIP.
DSRIP, thank you.
Delivery System Improvement Program.
In delivery system, that's the multi-year plan that for the medical center. So the adjustment in full-time equivalent positions for the non-general fund, this is just, again, post-preliminary adjustments at 0.
And before you leave that, so there's about $550,000 greater increase in revenue than the increase in appropriations for non-general fund down here. So does that simply decrease net county cost to those departments? To those departments.
The majority of it is actually due to the DSRIP program at Medical Center, correct. That would decrease their overall net cost. Yes.
Net county.
Yes,
County cost.
Their net costs or their revenues, or it actually increase their revenues, increase their bottom line. It wouldn't specifically affect general fund because they're non-general fund departments.
Got it. Thank you.
Again, these are the after-the-fact numbers. Last year we used designations of $3.3 million, and this year we're using the $200,000. Again, you see the general purpose revenue down to about $315 million versus about $315.8, almost $316 million. So we're down just about $1 million general purpose revenue from last year to this year, and that's that 0.3%, if you recall. Your board is always asking, why don't we have more money? The next few slides I'll kind of explain why we don't have a lot of discretion over the revenues and over the expenses that we have. Clearly, your board has discretion over this entire budget, this $1.68 billion, huge number of programs within this budget. But as far as ability to spend between departments, you can't take fire district dollars and spend it for the healthcare plan, so to speak. So, and this is where your board's seen this pie before, and I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this and go through it. If we could get rid of the non-general fund, you're down to $872 million in the general fund. The non-general fund, of course, is fire and medical center, those types of things. That there's not a lot of flexibility relative to what you can and can't do. Within the fire district, clearly, you can say we don't want to perform this function or we want to perform this function, but again, taking money from fire and using for general purposes is not available. We take out the direct revenue, which again, your board, we get a lot of direct revenue, charges for services. I think we've been through that enough in the last couple weeks. about 170 million there, and then an additional 350 million or so from federal and state program dollars coming in. Total direct revenue about 557 million. Not a lot of flexibility. If you don't want the direct revenue, that's fine, but that program generally will go away. So there's not a lot of flexibility regarding your board from the general direct revenue standpoint. So we take that out, and we're left with the general purpose revenue about 315 million. However, out of that, public safety is entitled under 4088 to about $183 million. Again, you have flexibility over some that specific funding, and we'll get in a little more detail on that. But in general, the amount of set aside for the public safety, 183 million. That leaves with what we call post-public safety revenue of 132 million. Take out the non-discretionary items of 70 million, which is our in-home support services contributions to all these various items. We left with $62 million of, let's call it discretionary revenue. But the discretionary revenue includes all of our net general fund costs for all of the general government departments, all of the environmental balance departments, and all the matching funds in the Health and Human Services Department. Example is $9 million contribution. Of 9 of the 62 brings in $110 million in appropriations in the Human Services Department. So you take away, yeah, we can cut $9 million, or your board can cut $9 million, but clearly we'd lose $110 million of the direct, well, I guess the difference would be the $101 million of direct revenue that was coming in to run those programs. So the discretion piece of the pie is very, 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 very small. I kind of like to go through it real quick and see, just it gets eaten up pretty quick. And so you end up with virtually minor discretion when it comes down to budget time. There is discretion, obviously, throughout the year from your board standpoint, but just want to point that out.
Well, you can spend 1.6 billion just like that.
Just like that. It goes quick.
It's not what it used to be.
Again, we have to reiterate the fact there are potential state budget impacts. Right now, we see the key impacts at the schools, K through 12, and higher education. I think from what we've seen, and as far as what the all cuts budget that the governors put out, or even the one that was really temporarily passed by the legislature and quickly vetoed, a lot of the cuts were in the K through 12 and higher education dollars. Our vehicle license fee funding for public safety programs is at risk for probation, district attorney, and sheriff, and we've had a discussion on that in the past and regarding to what those impacts are for those departments. Again, we would expect any all cuts budget scenario to again hit human services and our healthcare agency once again. So we are aware of that, and we don't expect the state to pass anything very soon, and we would clearly be back to your board with any adjustments as necessary. Public safety contribution. This is the first time we've seen this chart this way, so I guess that's bad news. The increase in general purpose revenue, or decrease in general purpose revenue, is on the left, $983,000 decrease in general purpose revenue. The chart on the right is our increase in contribution to public safety for next fiscal year. So clearly, I think that what this does point out is that when it comes down to net cost and contribution to the public safety departments, they are very much a priority, as we lost almost $1 million in revenue and increased $2.75 million to those public safety departments.
I just want to point out, for the benefit of our public safety departments, this is happening because it's essential that we continue to fund public safety, and at the same time, this is the kind of thing that's hard to do in the long run over and over again, year after year, and I know everybody recognizes that as we go forward. So, right. Thank you.
This is the Ordinance 4088 MOE. This is our public safety preliminary budget. It is one in the blue, $182.5 million. According to our ability to pay, which is on the right side, it's $179.2 million. So it's about $3.2 million, $3.3 million difference between those two numbers. So our ability to pay actually went down this year by 0.3%. So under that ordinance, theoretically, your board could have reduced the contribution to the 4 public safety departments by that 0.3%. But regardless, it is at $182.5 million, and the ordinance, the formula-based entitlement, which is the red number, is the number we continually calculate each year, and that is their baseline that eventually we try to get back to, or is the minimum amount in the long run, I should say. And that's the 141. We're about $1 million above that number. This is the pie chart. Last time we showed this to you was this was prior to the $3 million decrease in general purpose revenues, and the green piece was 57%. Now it is either 56 or 57%. Now it's at 58%. So that again, I think goes to what Supervisor Bennett was alluding to, that eventually you can't keep doing this, otherwise the whole pie is green. So I think that clearly this is an unusual year, the year coming up. But I think the priority for the public safety is definitely there. And Sheriff Dean always likes to see this pie chart, so I always like to bring it up every year.
Leave it up there.
Historically, what has that green done? We've seen it increase just each year.
Yeah, it started out about, when we started really this process, it was about 54%, I believe. Went way back years ago, prior to the 4088 and the whole ramp up. It was significantly less than that. We can get that information, but it was, I don't even want to guess, it was significantly less than that amount.
This percentage has been increasing, say, pretty regularly over the last 8 years?
Yes, it has been increasing, yes.
I don't think it's been flat. It's always been increasing.
Well, it's always been increasing, and the problem is our revenues aren't growing fast enough to increase fast enough to continue to support that. And that's the problem. It's not really. It's kind of a revenue issue this year. It's for next fiscal year. It's really a revenue issue because the sheriff and the public safety, all the public safety departments have really tried to control their costs. All the departments have tried to control their costs, but there's still not. Regardless of that, there's still not enough revenue to go around. So that's our key issue, is on the revenue side.
I also think that we also believe that it's the core of what we do, and we'll know we'll spend more money long term if we don't spend some of that money now. Because what will get us so out of control, like some of the other counties we deal with, they're playing catch up to so much because they weren't willing to spend a little bit every year. But you're right, trying to find some way to continue that's going to be very difficult. But it makes the county what we have today because we are willing to make those contributions.
That's right.
Supervisor Zaragoza?
Paul, and how about the realignment? What's going to happen to that percentage with the realignment? If that happens, yeah.
Well, theoretically, shouldn't
Shouldn't.
increase or decrease, because that realignment dollars will come down as what we would call direct revenue for those specific departments to run those specific programs.
If we get the revenues.
Right. If we get that, if we get the realignment, the new realignment. So theoretically, the overall revenue and appropriations for those departments that get the realignment would go up, but the contribution from the general fund shouldn't change.
Shouldn't change at all.
From those programs. I mean, that's the idea behind the realignment. Now, whether or not down the road that is true, probably the state knows, but nobody else does. But that's one of the let's call it exposures from our standpoint.
Well, that's a big concern that we're not
Yes.
going to get future funding for that.
That's correct, and proportionate increases and those types of things at one time, or whether or not they've calculated in all the real cost of the process.
And sharing that cost not only with our general fund contribution, the cities also are seeing some more contribution towards a rate increase for the city contracts.
That is correct. That is correct. We wouldn't see it here in this particular piece of the pie. On the appropriation standpoint, and the sheriff charges are, I think, about $1.7 million increase from prior year. That's a big. I think about a 3% increase, if I recall, which isn't significant relative to the amount that the sheriff had increases in their retirement contribution. But regardless, it is an increase for those cities.
Yeah, the other point I would make on that is that the Sheriff's Office is also working hard to reduce their costs. So this next year, they're going to reduce their costs by $2.5 million plus. So that's taken a lot of work by Sheriff Dean and his whole team there. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. And then just finally here, the budget is a living document, and so what that means is we're going to come back to your boards regularly and at least quarterly to give you updates on how things are going in terms of state issues, economic issues, and just basically how the departments are performing in relation to the budget projections that we have. Because it's something that we need to watch regularly for this next year, but it's also something that we need to look to, as you can see in a couple of bullet points down, long-term sustainability. So we're looking at 11-12, but also with an eye towards realizing that 12-13 is going to be another tough year. And so the earlier that we prepare for that, the better off we're going to be. And you're familiar with the other issues up there. The last thing I would say is just to thank the department heads and their teams and their fiscal teams, as well as Paul Dursey and K-Man and the analysts in the CEO's office for getting us to this point. There's a lot that's summarized, and you can see it in the large book here, to get to this point. And I just want to thank them for their excellent efforts. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Board members have any questions of the CEO and their presentation? Yes,
Yeah.
Supervisor.
I've got a couple. One, a year ago when we were at these budget hearings, the board talked about the fact that the Parks Department was receiving no general fund contribution and trying to do it all as enterprise, and we felt like it was important to have some contribution because it was just hamstringing their ability to do normal operations if they always had to be completely focused on fees coming in, and that's not part of the budget now this year. Can you tell me about those discussions?
Yeah. Primarily, the idea was that we would look at where we were relative to our current year projection, current year expectations as far as unspent appropriations and fund balance, and then take from those dollars and try to make a contribution up to a certain dollar amount. I believe it's $300,000, if I recall.
Right.
That we would come up with a contribution to the Parks Department in that amount for capital improvements and maintenance and upgrades. This year we're projecting zero as far as our fund balance, so we didn't have that flexibility relative to that $300,000. Is that a number that we won't know that number, frankly, until probably September timeframe.
When that number comes in September, will that come to the board?
Generally, it does not. Your board could provide final motion adjustments. I better clear this with county council to make that if the money does come in excess of the $0 that we are projecting.
Because I do think you have that accurately portrayed, which was our motion was if there is fund balance that we wanted to dedicate $300,000 to parks because of all of the needs that they have in terms of going forward. And board members, there isn't a fund balance, but if there is, I think that would be certainly appropriate. So I think that will be something I'll be asking for when we do our final hearing, is for when we do actually know our fund balance and know what that is. On the other hand, I may simply say if the fund balance is such and such, go ahead and allocate the $300,000 there for that.
Looking at the Exhibit 8 under the Parks Capital Projects, I'm seeing last year the actual for capital was $2.9 million, and this year the preliminary showing $3.8, and I guess that's showing the need for capital, which is almost $1 million, if I'm reading it correctly, with a revenue source of less than $2 million. So they have significantly more expenditures that they're looking at for capital improvements, as I see $1 million worth. So I don't know at what point this, putting funds into parks will go, if their need is so great.
Yeah, I think they'll have a constant need relative to what they're generating right now in revenue. The specifics of that probably have to have the Parks Department come up and discuss.
So I guess the
specifics.
difference, I'm hearing 200,000 and I'm seeing $1 million. So I'm wondering, at that point, if we're really looking at funding more, what specifically in the Parks Department are we looking at?
Well, a lot of times a department will come up with a list of projects. For example, in our general service agency, our required maintenance, we have a list of projects that's in excess of $25 million. But as we go through it, we have a kind of a work down sheet that we're going to get to all these project over a number of years, and it's kind of a ongoing maintenance and upgrade process. Whether or not, again, I'd have to have Parks Department discuss that specifically. But I think clearly their needs will always be greater than what they have available from a funding standpoint.
And, I know after your presentation, we'll have board discussion, and then each of the departments will have an opportunity to make a presentation. But Mr. Gosgold, if you'd like to answer this specifically now.
Well, if you remember last year, we showed a chart that had the delta between what we considered to be our minimum required maintenance, which was roughly in the neighborhood of the 300,000, and that's what we were looking for. And the Park Enterprise Fund does bring in revenues, as you know, and they bring in enough to do the O&M, basically the daily operations and maintenance of our parks, and that's sufficient within a couple of dollars either way. But what we're talking about here is the capital improvements to make sure that we keep our parks in minimally acceptable condition. We're certainly not looking at major facelifts on these parks.
Do you know where I'm seeing the estimated actual for 2010-11 is 2.9 million, and the preliminary for 2011-12 is 3.8 million, so it's looking at almost $1 million.
Yeah, I'll have to get you the specifics on that. I don't have them
appreciate
with
that,
me.
so we know what we're looking at, what the need and what needs to be filled.
But that is different, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You may be asked the same question.
That is different than what you identify as the minimum operation,
Right.
minimum maintenance
Correct.
budget, right? So we have a minimum maintenance budget and we have a capital improvements budget.
And
They're
that's
different.
that's what the 300,000 additional was going to do.
It's going to do what we consider to be the minimally acceptable capital improvements to make sure that we can we can continue to
And
operate
what is
our
that
park.
figure again?
We used the 300,000.
300,000. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, and you have a list of the projects
Yes.
that you're going to do. Yeah.
So I had one other question for Mr. Dursey, and that is, traditionally on a day like today, we're looking for small chunks of money, right? Sometimes for things that we've heard about that we're looking to do, et cetera. And so, so that's why I've been trying to listen to your adjustments, et cetera. I mean, if we ended up after the hearing this evening and we were in the $200,000 range, my question is, I heard some things about adjustments here today that just you were making. Is that
Are they etched in concrete?
What would be your recommendation, I guess, in terms of the CEO and Mr. Dursey, if we were going that direction?
Well, I think that fundamentally our property tax dollars are let's say $255 million, and is that within a gnat's eye of 1% difference is $2.5 million. We think we're within 1% easily. Are we within 1/10 of 1%? Probably not at this point, plus or minus, if that helps you. Are we comfortable with the numbers? Absolutely, we're very comfortable with the numbers. We think they're conservative, but very very reasonable, based on historical information, based on the most recent data that the assessor's given us, and so we're very comfortable with those numbers as they are.
Okay, thank you.
And just
We have
Just
a
a-
question from Supervisor
you.
Foy, and
thank you.
he defers to you.
Thank you. So that difference between what the 1.5% we were projecting and the assessor's adjustment ends up being 2.5 to 3 million. And the ways that we're addressing that is the 1 million reduction in interest expense, and also the adjustment in the buy down account by about 2 million. Now, does it have to be 2 million? Not necessarily, but that also gives us a very conservatively balanced budget, because that assumes absolutely almost zero growth in property tax revenues, where even if there were some transactions, one of the things we were looking at before is as the transactions increased, we would see a little bit of increase in the supplemental revenues. But so we're being very, very conservative in doing that.
So if the buy down account you're saying is the one that's being very conservatively projected, and there could be a little bit more in terms of the buy down account.
I guess that was my question. If we get into this, you used to have quarterly updates. Because this budget is so close and so tight, are we going to see this more on a regular basis, even quarterly? I mean, get some trending at all, Paul? I mean, what's really going on? Because, these numbers that the assessor give us, if it goes the other way, a quarter point, half point could be worth a lot of money, and making some adjustments during the year.
Right. I think the idea is the problem with the first quarter is that when you get the data, the accounting data isn't as accurate as we'd like it to, because what you do is they reverse last year's accruals, and it's an accounting issue that the first quarter is a little bit squirrely from an accounting standpoint, but from an operational standpoint, departments will know where they are, and from an overall assessed roll value, we can see what they are. We can get a feel of the supplemental assessments and those types of things. Certainly we can get some indications. We'll know where our first quarter is from a revenue standpoint relative to sales tax and our Prop 172 sales tax. On the sales tax side, just pure general fund sales tax, we don't have, it's not a significant dollar amount for us. I think it's $8 million in that range. We only have that increase 3%, which in our mind, that's pretty conservative. We're trying to maintain a somewhat conservative amount, but we don't see the increases in sales tax in the unincorporated area that we may see in Thousand Oaks or those types of things. So we're trying to maintain some reasonableness, but also based on history and not be too aggressive. I think the state controller, or not state controller, but the Department of Finance, I think initially was projecting a 9% increase in their sales tax, and even the LAO had, I think, 6.5% in their numbers. So our 3% is pretty, from a, let's call it general purpose revenue sales tax. On the other side, on the Prop 172, which covers the entire county, not just the unincorporated area, our numbers are higher as far as sales tax increases.
Right. Well, the other thing I would add is that the assessor has also done a very good job of capturing that loss in the market, in the properties. So to the extent there's any kind of change in that, that's going to be positive.
Right.
And I think that strong work also gives us a very conservative revenue projection.
Yeah, I guess I was just more concerned that we were just not going to allow it to go too long. We've done before with sales tax, and we ended up, $4 or $5 million under. But we also had departments that done a tremendous job, and we were always adding some money to our reserves, as unused money in their budgets. We don't really have. We squeezed these budgets down pretty tight this year. So I was just curious how quickly we're going to be able to come up and make some adjustments if we can, so we don't get too squeezed at the end. I mean, it just, when it gets tight, you got to look at it more often, right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor
So, Paul, you're saying the assessor says we're getting X dollars, and we're budgeting Y dollars, but we have enough money to make up the difference.
We're basically budgeting at what the assessor is assuming the increase or decrease. He's assuming basically a zero increase.
Zero increase.
I think it was like 0.02% or something like that decrease, which is, for all intents and purposes, zero.
So we're budgeting
at that
with
number.
his number then.
Basically at that number. Technically, we're right about his number, because we have, I think, a little bit less budgeted next year for this secured revenue than we're projecting for this current fiscal year.
So if we get an increase, so then we're going to be much better. Okay.
Supervisor Long?
Just, I would be hard pressed for us to look at anything being surplus, anything being rollover, anything. We're looking, going to page 261 on probation, $4.7 million. We don't have a state budget yet. I don't know who's going to pull the genie out of where and when, but it's so dire, and dire in the sense of the probation, the impacts that have happened in our public health. I've taken surplus out of our conversation. Rollover. And I'm not a doomsdayer by any means. I just think that looking at what is presented to us and looking at, we know we're going to be back to this, whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, we will be back to this when it really does start to roll down from Sacramento. So just a comment.
Supervisor Bennett?
I appreciate that. I mean, that's what makes this such a tough year, all the way around. We don't know how bad, we don't know what's happening down the road. I would like to make these comments before we hear from the different departments, but it's been a remarkable spring, I think, in terms of the amount of cooperation we've gotten from public safety, in particular the sheriff, in a fresh new approach to the cuts. And it doesn't make it easy, but it certainly makes it easier to say, even though our revenues are going down, we're going to find a way to increase, allocations to the sheriff. And I appreciate that, particularly probation with vehicle license fee. That's just this sword just hanging over us, and it's going to be huge in terms of the impacts. So, one, I want to make that comment. The other thing is, I think we have a real crisis with children's. And the investigations that we've done out there. I think that I want to be certain that the 8 Child Protective Service workers that Human Service Agency was asking for, and the CEOs agreed that we are able to pull that off. But even with that, I think we've got to recognize that checking on the welfare of those children is a public safety issue, every bit as much a public safety issue as many of the other public safety functions that we have out there. And in the long run, we can't. Right now, part of how we're covering is we're shifting social workers from adoptions and ultimately from foster care to be able to help close this gap also. And I just want to use today to call that out and recognize, there's a limit to how long we can do that before we start causing problems at the other end of the pipeline, which is not enough foster homes and no place for those children to go. The presentation that we heard last weekend in terms of the seniors and the situation that's out there. So trying to call that out. Also, the RAIN program is funded $141,000 less than what we need to run it. And I think that in these times, I can't imagine us not making sure that happens. So some of these things, we're literally starting the year off. Everybody, probably every department is certainly starting the year off, with not really the budget to even quite get to the critical need, that they have here. Want to call those things out and recognize those things as we try to move forward here. Right. So, thank you very much.
And certainly there are some incredible programs that our Sheriff's Department's doing with the multidisciplinary approach to getting inmates out and not having that recidivism that saves money in the long run. Looking at the expert team with the Human Services Agency, the rapid response team that has removed at least a third of the people that were in adult protective services, so they don't have to be in that expensive program, but putting them in a safer situation. So there's some excellent programs out there, and ones that we need, as well as the ones that you mentioned. And those are ongoing costs, but hopefully in the long run, some of those programs are actually going to reduce costs. And what we're talking about now, when you were referencing the parks maintenance budget, those are one-time only costs. It comes from a different pot because they're not continuing fees or funds. But in the end, if we don't take care of a lot of these maintenance, including our roads, we end up paying more in the long run. Supervisor Fly?
I just want a couple comments too, is that I appreciate all the hard work that every department did to find a way to make them balance their budget. I know it's tough. It's never any fun to have to make these adjustments. But I would say that I don't believe these are just one-time adjustments. I know from the CEO's office they understand that next year could be a very difficult year. I don't believe we're going to grow out of this very quickly. If we do, it's going to be very, very tough. And I think Supervisor Long has talked about there's just not a lot of solutions out there. We've got a lot of things that are added to our cost. Even when we borrow money at Trans, right? We borrow it very cheap. But when interest rates go up, it's going to could cost us twice as much for the exact same thing. And there's a lot of those out there. So I hope that you're looking at your budgets on a 3- and 5-year plan, and that you're looking to say, I'm just not making this adjustment now. I'm looking how I can find new ways to be creative, to do the same services. One of the things I don't think any of us want to do is give up the services that we provide. We're just asking you to find new ways to do it, maybe different creative ways to do it, things look outside the box if possible. And because it's going to get tough. And you know, you're the ones doing the hard work out there. You're the ones shouldering the load for this public. And so our goal is to I believe our goal up here is to make sure we have a financially sound county. And I know that that's what everybody wants, because without that, we could look like the others, just having to lay off and lay off and lay off. We've done some really good things, and you've worked really hard to make this happen. And the employees themselves, paying for their pensions, they've done a lot. But we've got to continue this. It's just not going to go away. So I would ask that you keep working, find the ways, keep doing more. I appreciate the CEO's office. They've come up with a whole lot, and they're pushing that too. They're going to give you all the support you can to find it. And the critical things we're going to have to fund. There's no question about it. But we just got to find a way to do them a little less expensive. So again, thank you for what you've done, the hard work you've put in, but I got to tell you, it's got to continue.
Manager.
Supervisor Zaragoza, just before you go, you're done with your presentation, Mr. Dursey?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I guess we are now going into that part of the meeting, which is board comments. Is that correct? So Supervisor Zaragoza,
So
you may
we're-
have some more. Okay.
Board
Supervisor
comments? Yeah,
Zaragoza.
I also want to thank the staff, for the strategic workforce management that Mr. Powers was talking about the managers and all the hard work that the managers are doing, and also the ISF reduction, I think, has helped us tremendously in balancing our budgets. And also the employees who are helping us with the retirement, saving us $14 million. The one concern that I have, of course, it's probably up to the state, is the VLF, the good work that probation is doing over at the JJC, the different programs that they have for our youth. And somehow, somewhere, I hope that we fund that program because of the assistance that they give in our youth. If we don't, they're going to be coming right back, and ultimately it's going to cost us some more money to take care of those children. But I think probation is doing an excellent job over at the JJC with those programs. And one of the important things that I think is really important that we have not had any layoffs or any furloughs here in Ventura County like other cities and other counties and so forth. So because of the belt tightening that our agency directors have done and our employees that have helped us maintain a lean and mean budget, I think it's extremely important. So I just want to commend all our employees for that.
Thank you. The board comments, supervisors? I agree. We have something pretty incredible over at the JJC, and it's something that fortunately we've had funding for to allow for really good services on an individual basis, something that we'd love to carry over to our adult population too, but actually using that as an example. And we are doing some good things with the adult population, just starting some pilot programs that hopefully will continue because they do seem like a solution. And I too want to thank the different departments that stayed in their budget this last year and those that actually reduced last year, cut costs, and are looking at further tightening this year, unfortunately. We've been able to hold down raises, not filling positions, and departments have gone under a lot more burden as a result of not filling those positions, but also finding some creative solutions, and that's really exciting. Sometimes they say it takes a crisis, to be able to come forward with some really good programs, and I think we're seeing examples of that here in Ventura County, and we are providing better efficiencies as a result of it. So that's really good government. I want to give a special shout out to some of those departments that have reduced, and that's Resource Management, Agency Building and Safety, and Enforcement departments are taking a less amount this year than they did last year, even though they have gone through some tightening last year. Same thing with the District Attorney, Probation Department, and Public Defender. And obviously we're seeing some tightening by our Sheriff's Department, looking at new ways of doing things, including reverse contracting, which is creative and hopefully we'll be able to use these examples to further benefit government. Where Supervisor Foy was saying it's going to get worse next year, we're putting ourselves, I think, continually putting ourselves in good stead, continuing to reduce government expenditures for those things that are county general fund funds, and I think that's very positive. So I do just really want to congratulate those departments. We know that you're working hard and that you're succeeding in doing that, so I appreciate that, and I wanted to extend that because these are difficult times. Supervisor Long?
Yeah, thank you, and well said. Just one quick thing I did want to mention, that I really appreciate the budget book and the sections that have been spelled out. I've talked to my staff about when a public member should ask a question about, well, what's the future, and what are we looking at in our challenges, and to have that, these sections that really kind of lay it out there in most cases, gives us all something to walk and talk with, to one another in the agencies you interact with, but also with the public. It really does say, here's the good work that's been done, here's what's underway, here's the accomplishments to date, and here's what we're looking ahead at for both future and financial impact. So I think it's a very useful document, user friendly, and put out there well. So,
Thank
thanks.
you. We can go on to the next part of our agenda. Or Supervisor Zaragoza, you look like you're ready
No,
to
and I had
say something.
and I had here on my thank you to the management. I had the public safety programs that you were way down in the bottom, and I had on the list on top, sure, but I just want to thank you and the fire department for the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Okay. Our next item on the agenda then are our outline. And by the way, I actually skipped a couple things at the beginning of the agenda, which we can go back to if we'd all like. And that is, you want to call the roll?
I noted that, but Supervisor Bennett,
Here.
Supervisor Zaragoza,
Here.
Supervisor Long,
Here.
Supervisor Foy, and Supervisor Parks.
Here. And could I have a motion to accept the agenda as presented to us? Are we good with that?
Sure.
Motion. And a second from Supervisor Zaragoza. Great. Thank you. And we can go to our staff presentations. We have a whole list of them. But first, how about the Pledge of Allegiance? So if you all please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Now we're all caught up. And yeah, we get a little exercise, get up and move. We have now our presentations from our different departments, and I have a whole list of them. And I'll call them, and they have the option to coming up and giving their presentations, including responding to board questions. But we will be taking all our testimony from the public beginning at 6 p.m. this evening and continuing on following the days and times as necessary. After the end of public testimony, we'll deliberate, take some straw votes as necessary for our general fund budget units and non-general fund budget units, and then adopt, after detailed deliberations, any adjustments in as well as adopting our exhibits and resolutions. So with that, I'll go ahead and call the different departments up if they are desirous of giving a presentation. And I can start with our general government. So would the assessor like to come up? Mr. Goodwin?
Good afternoon. Dan Goodwin, assessor for the record. I did not prepare a PowerPoint, but given the discussion that you had, I certainly am available if there should be some questions you'd like me to try to answer. I'm available
Thank you.
for that.
Does the board have any questions? Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I don't think there are any questions for you. Our auditor controller, did you want to add? I know you had a presentation. Did you want to add
No
anything?
addition material.
Okay. How about the Civil Service Commission? Do we have our, no, we don't have our executive officer of that here with us now. The county clerk and recorder, Mr. Lunn, you don't want to talk about the wedding rings going from $7 to $13 now for those who want to get married?
How about all mail-in ballots?
Do you want to discuss the potential of an all-mail?
Now you found his interest.
And this is something I think the grand jury looked at a little bit too.
I think she was concerned of those wedding rings, that bride might not get that ring for extra $5, so.
Good afternoon. I think you probably wanted to talk to me. Good afternoon, Board, Mr. Powers. You had a question about the all-mail ballots? Yes, I think we have a little question to answer coming up. I think that is something that we certainly, prior to making a response to the grand jury, certainly I'm in support of. And I think we need to look at it, but that isn't an easy decision for any of us to make, because by informal polling, we have 50% of our voters here in Ventura County vote by mail now, in rough numbers, which means we have 50% of the rest of our electorate that elects to vote at the precinct. So we have people of generations that have gone to the poll and want to cast their ballots. So we're certainly going to look at it. Certainly, we are looking right now in preparing a response to the grand jury to look at the possible economic savings of it. I'm in favor of it. I've been a vote-by-mail voter for a long time, but I want to proceed very carefully. So our job is to encourage people coming to the polls and to encourage them participating in democracy, and I do not want to leave anybody out in that process. So I hope that answers your question, Supervisor.
It did. It's just, I know there's some more, potentially some future legislative push to do
Yes.
that. So
And the basis for it is primarily cost savings.
it is.
It is.
Absolutely.
Can you give us a relative idea of what kind of cost savings is involved in that?
We're in the process of doing that now. It just depends on what type of an election there is, and I don't want to be too hasty in the analysis at this point because I want to provide good counsel when we do.
Okay.
Thank you.
But
Thanks
we know
very
it's
much.
significant. Thank you for being here for this.
Thank
Our next opportunity for a presentation, County Council. Thank you. CEO's office. No. Treasure Tax Collector, Mr. Hintz. Okay. And then we're on to environmental balance. Our Agricultural Commissioner. Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Powers. We prepared our budget so effectively that there's no need to make a presentation. I'm here for questions, if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Do we have any questions? That's good. It was that great preparation.
Thank you.
Our next is Animal Services. I know we did have one presentation. You have some more to add, Ms. Nolan?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. No, I didn't bring any animals with me today, so I'm just here to answer questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question.
Supervisor.
When you were here last time and you talked with us, it was a coordinator for volunteers that you thought would dramatically improve your productivity. And can you just tell me a little bit more about that position and any other options besides general fund money that might be there? Are there any grants out there? Are there any organizations that might be willing? I know you already have some grants for that. But it seems like a very productive investment. But
it's a great, very productive. I think I had put up on the board 7,600 hours that we had gotten in volunteer hours just in this fiscal year to that point when I gave the presentation. The grants that I've seen out there right now are grants for enrichment of the animals and capital projects. They don't seem to be grants that will grant man hours. And so I haven't really seen anything that will fund people. Currently, the volunteer position is half-time, and that's costing us about $20,000. It would, to bring it up to three-quarter, we'd have to be at least another $20,000 because we'd have to be putting in additional benefits. Full-time would probably be about another 35 to put it into full-time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Do we have someone, the farm advisor?
Yes, we have a presentation.
Thank you. And a public works agency?
No presentation, but we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Any questions? Resource management agency?
No presentation, but here to answer questions.
Thank you. And now on to our health and human services. And that would be area agency on aging.
And we have no presentation.
Okay, thank you. And our healthcare, oops. Oh, I guess healthcare agency, yes.
We have no
Okay.
no additional presentation.
Human services agency, Mr. Zimmerman?
Yeah, no added presentation.
Yeah, I'd like to ask.
We
some
have
questions.
one for you, or two, or three.
Not getting off that easy, Barry.
I'll just add my same requests are still valid, but
Great, thank you. I just want to make sure that I clearly have the picture understood. So you've worked out an arrangement with the CEO for the eight Children's Protective Service positions that you felt were essential. Is that correct?
I think we're working out how to mechanically do that. That's correct. We had a few vacancies that they wanted us to fill, and as of today, we've filled all those. And so now we'll be working on those additional positions.
Okay. So you feel like you've got the eight. You're working it out with the CEO's office in terms of the exact funding and,
Right.
and all that for the eight. Now, in terms of the other issues that I brought up, the RAIN program, we're starting off $141,000 short.
Right.
What's your game plan for the RAIN program? over the course of
Both
this year?
the RAIN and the PAPG are starting off underfunded in the budget as presented. The strategy is actually we have to garner savings elsewhere in the budget to cover those. We can't cut those specific programs in themselves without decimating the services itself. So we're not looking to take those further down in that regard.
Okay. The program, the Children Protective Services, the 8 that you identified as the bare minimum, you actually needed, I believe you said with your report, about 25 to be.
Yeah, I think it was 35.
It's 35 to
Yeah.
be at the service level that would be sort of national standards.
Well, that would, yeah, what we would say would be an optimal service level standard for caseload, yes.
Right. Okay. And then the program you presented last week with Area Agency on Aging, that program. What are the other options in terms of trying to get there? If we don't have funding here today for you.
Well, we continue to seek after other revenue sources, grants, and we secured one grant for $90,000 from Artstone, which you heard about, but that doesn't quite meet up the total to keep it going. So what we'll probably do is, as the grants allow us, or as the funding allows us, to have it staffed at that level. So that could either say that we fully staff it for a quarter, or we minimally staff it for a longer period of time, and just to keep this structure going.
And in the long run, what do you see happening to cost if the program goes away?
Well, we'll have probably more demand on APS is what it is, because what we're showing is the evidence of stabilizing individuals where we don't have to bring them in and churn them back through the system, because we've remedied some of the safety issues and issues with the family.
And you got the grant for the $90,000, and you need how much?
About 140.
So you're $50,000 short?
No, 140 additional.
right.
It's about $200,000. The grant, 90,000, is an 18-month grant, so it's not just a 12-month grant. So if you prorate that over a 12-month period, it's about 140,000.
Right. In terms of trying to keep that program. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My question is, in the same manner that you're looking at funding those 8, could this additional funding to keep the Adult Protective Services funded in their TRIO program be done the same way?
Sure. We could work with the CO's office and work as we go through the year, but knowing at some point in time we'd probably have to come back to the board for an adjustment somewhere along the line.
Okay. Because it certainly is a program that we need to keep going, in my opinion. So.
Well, I agree, and it is somewhat tricky, and I'm not trying to be elusive in this regard, but our budget's so dynamic in respect of the state financing and so forth that it has wild swings in how that impacts our budget. So, for us, it's important to have policy and authorization to move forward to maintain things, and then work them out throughout the year is very acceptable in that regard.
But what also may happen is the state may be so bad that those programs have to go because we're fighting to save other things.
That's correct.
And that's why there could be this idea of move forward, but tentatively in terms of what may end up happening.
But we would like to move forward with approval.
Yes.
So.
Supervisor Long?
The RAIN project is challenging for us, and I appreciate the report with the accomplishments to date and the level of service that's been maintained. And looking at other programs up and down the state and what creative things they're doing. In some cases, I want to say it was Salvation. I won't say who it is because I don't recall exactly where they, as a way to engage the clients to be served as an investment in the services that are provided, that there's actually a fee or a charge to the clients, and I'm not proposing that. That's a real tough one. But I did read where some nonprofits are going that direction.
Yeah.
Very nominal. It's a part of, again, investment in long-term program support and solutions for them. We won't get rich off of it, and it won't make up the 100 and whatever plus that we, at all. And I guess at some point, we'll have further discussions on them.
Absolutely.
It is something when you hear about things like the microloans and other kinds of loans to a very low income that they do over time want to pay back, and you end up having remarkable repayment rates. So there might be something in the long term, not something that you can charge someone who's homeless right then and there. But thank you. Are there other questions for Mr. Zimmerman? Thank you. We'll go to administration of justice with our district attorney.
We have no presentation.
Okay, no presentation. Probation agency, do you wish to?
Good afternoon. No presentation at this time, but I am available for questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please. Thanks.
Come on down.
Why aren't you in Sacramento? Beating the drum.
Yeah, just could you brief us on the game plan? Assuming VLF goes away, what's your game plan in terms of implementation?
Well, it's a tough one right now. As it stands right now, VLF funding is set to expire at the end of this month. There's been some talk in Sacramento. The governor's pushing for bridge funding that'll get us past the special election if that is to happen. With the budget, the 16-hour budget that we had last week, VLF was not addressed. So our game plan is we have some funding that will take us a little bit further into next fiscal year. I'm anticipating about 3 months of funding. So depending on what we hear from Sacramento, and if it's not good news, if we lose our VLF funding, then we're going to have to ramp down some of the programs and bring back to our Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council the task of coming up with a plan of what we're going to do with a lot of those programs.
But right now, we lose the funding, we cut the programs.
That's going to be a tough decision, only because some of those those programs are very, very effective, and it includes many of our partners. So the discussion would be with our partners about finding some ways to continue some of these programs using...
Maybe on a reduced scale, or?
Yes, on a reduced scale.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
but that's a multiplying effect. If you lose the funding, you have all the nonprofits that lose.
Correct.
So you're talking not only the effect on the children, but also jobs and other agencies that are going to suffer as a result of that.
Yes, definitely. And also there's a good portion of the money that comes to us through juvenile probation and camps funding, which helps offset a lot of the costs in our juvenile justice facility. So there's that issue that comes up as well, which includes contracts and includes personnel, CBO costs. It also includes some of our agreements with our partnering agencies, which includes county agencies.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Barilla? Not seeing any. Thank you for giving us that status. And then our public defender, would you like to?
No presentation.
Okay, any questions? No. And then our sheriff?
Mr. Jersey's already shown my favorite slide, so.
Okay. your pie slice. And then our other funds would be our child support services. Afternoon.
Good afternoon. You don't get off quite as easily with me. I do have a few comments. Debbie Fromm from Child Support. You already know that there's outstanding work being done throughout your county departments, including in the Child Support Services Department. We have operated on flat funding from the state for 9 consecutive years, and we have worked hard to live within our allocation. We want you to know that you can continue to count on us to live within our means. At the inception of your Child Support Department on July 1st, 2002, we had a staff of 305. Today, we have a staff of 205. We are leaner than we have ever been before, and yet we are also more efficient, more effective, more proactive, and higher performing than we've ever been before. In spite of very rough economic times and high unemployment throughout the state, we continue to do what we do best. We collect money, a lot of money. In fiscal year 09-10, we increased our collections by over $600,000 over the previous fiscal year. And in this current federal fiscal year, we are currently on target to increase our collections another $100,000, bringing our total to just under $52 million. $52 million to support children and to help families in their pursuit of self-sufficiency, which also ultimately helps the county. In this current fiscal year, we created an early intervention team dedicated to engaging parents at the very start of their case, to work with us in a collaborative and expedited manner to benefit their children, and to establish a pattern of timely payments from the outset. As a result, children begin receiving child support within 30 days rather than waiting several months for a court order to be established. In addition, this past March, we created a very small collections team which focuses resources on the hard-to-reach non-paying parents. This team has been in place for just 3 months, but we're already seeing results. To date, they have reviewed over 1,500 cases, located 320 absent obligors, and collected $28,725.20 on cases that had not been receiving payments. We also created an outreach team to increase public education in the community. Their efforts include reaching diverse cultures and generations, including teen parenting programs in the Mixteco community. And finally, our call center continues to serve as a model for child support agencies throughout the state. Our customer contact teams handle well over 10,000 calls a month from child support customers in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. The state standard is to answer calls within 3 minutes. Our own department standard is to answer calls within 60 seconds, and we consistently exceed our own standard by answering all calls in well under 40 seconds. You can be very proud of the work being done in your child support department. Your county child support professionals are remarkable in their dedication, their resilience, their work ethic, and in their pursuit of efficiency and excellence in public service. On behalf of all of us, thank you for your tremendous support historically and going forward. That support is clearly a reflection of the importance you place on the well-being of children and the responsibility of both parents to promote that well-being. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Supervisor Foy.
I just got to tell you, you're just a tremendous example of, we're not whining about it. It's been cut, it's been cut, it's been cut, but we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep working it. We're going to be the leader in the state doing it. It's just tremendous to hear that. And I think for all of us, we'd be proud for what you're doing, because you could say we just have the money, we can't help these kids and these families, but you're saying no, that's not true. We collected $600,000 more than last year. Supervisor Long and I are sitting there going, in a recession, people don't have money to pay, and you're still finding the money for them.
Right.
So congratulations for what you're doing. And
Thank you.
It's tough, but keep up the great work. I mean, I know technology's helped you, but it's the attitude you all have. I mean, I remember going through that department. It was just tremendous attitude of, no matter what we're going to do, we're going to help these kids and these families. So congratulations. Keep it up. Be an example for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Madam Chair, if you just say that, as you talk and being able to be part of gathering $52 million, it reminds me to remind everybody that if you work for the county, there are a lot of cool jobs you can do that make you really be able to both combine your passion with the real sense of contribution,
You bet.
to your community, and that's just a classic example. And while I have the floor, I just want to talk about one other contribution. We talk about the sheriff and the remarkable things he did with his budget, but that didn't stop him from Saturday night spending 3 or 4 hours at the graduation for our transitional age youth at Costa Pacifica. And there's a whole lot of other things that the sheriff of our county could be doing on Saturday night, but that's where he was. So thank you very much for being there, Sheriff Dean.
Yes. And I just want to say the Child Support Department is rather unheralded. People don't talk about it too much, and you don't know much about it. You don't read too much about it. But to have dealing with 100 less staff and having greater return is just incredible, and it really is a testament to the dedication of your staff, and it's great to hear. It is a wonderful example.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor
I'd also like to commend you, and I remember when we interviewed you and you said you were going to do wonderful things, and you've done it. And I want to thank you so much for your work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Continuing with innovation, it's just remarkable. Our next is our Ventura County Library.
No report at this time, Supervisors,
Okay.
but I'm available for questions.
Thank you. And then next is our enterprise funds. That would be our airports and our harbor. And does our airport wish to? Okay.
No presentation.
Are there any questions by the board on either one of these enterprise funds? Not hearing any. Our internal service funds. This would be General Service Agency.
We have no formal presentation, but I would like to offer, Mr. Van Dyke is here if he can offer any information on the questions that came up earlier on the park capital improvement.
I have my questions answered.
Thank you. And then the information technology. Do we have any questions for information technology? We'll assume they don't have an additional presentation. And then it says, I get it, information technology services. They're not available for presentation right now. Special districts. And our special districts would be our Fire Protection District. Chief Roper?
No presentation.
No presentation. We have the redevelopment agency, and not seeing that they're going to be needing a presentation at this point. Okay, well, I think that concludes all the departments, unless I'm mistaken. And we'll go back to we do have the opportunity for public comment if there is anybody from the public, but not seeing any cards. So again, public testimony will be also at 6 p.m. this evening, and we will then continue with an open hearing and have our public testimony at 6 p.m. And I think at this point then we can go ahead and recess until our 6 p.m. public hearing.